Emily was called into the centre of the village by her stepmother, Margaret, who stood with arms crossed and eyes blazing. The entire village gathered, eager for gossip. Margaret's voice cut through the air like a blade, announcing that Emily would marry Jacob, the madman who lived near the woods. Shock rippled through the crowd, followed by gasps and stifled laughter. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as tears welled up in her eyes. She had always hoped for a quiet, respectful life, not this public humiliation. She looked over at Jacob, who was being led out like livestock. He walked slowly, not making eye contact, his clothes ragged and hair unkempt. His face, though tired, showed no madness, just quiet pain. The villagers laughed louder as Emily crumbled under the weight of shame. No one knew the truth about Jacob, not even Emily herself. As she stood there, helpless and humiliated, her life changed forever in that moment. And so did his. The wedding was rushed, almost like a joke. Villagers dressed in their finest came not to celebrate, but to witness the mockery unfold. Women wore bold prints and headscarves, whispering to one another and pointing. The ceremony was held under the old mango tree, the same place where countless happy unions had taken place. But this time, it was different. Emily stood stiffly beside Jacob, her hands trembling as she held her wilted bouquet. The priest hesitated before beginning, as even he felt the discomfort in the air. Jacob didn't say a word during the entire ceremony. He simply looked at the ground, never once meeting Emily's eyes. When the priest asked if he accepted her as his wife, he gave a slow nod. No smile, no joy, just a nod. Emily could feel the eyes of the villagers boring into her skin. Her stepmother smirked, proud of what she had orchestrated. The priest declared them husband and wife, and instead of cheers, laughter echoed through the village square. Emily felt like a lamb led to slaughter, her dignity stripped, her heart hollow. After the ceremony, there was no celebration, just silence. Emily and Jacob walked down the dusty path toward his tiny hut at the edge of the village. She had never been so humiliated. Her veil fluttered in the breeze, catching on low branches as curious children followed them at a distance, giggling and whispering. Emily's heart pounded with fear and uncertainty. She didn't know what kind of man Jacob truly was, only what the village claimed. The madman, the one who talked to himself, the one who lived alone. Jacob's home was barely more than a shack. Wooden walls, a leaking roof, and a single bench inside. When they arrived, he stepped aside and let her walk in first. No words, just a nod. Emily stepped into the small space and looked around. It was tidy, strangely enough. There were books stacked in a corner, a small blanket folded neatly on a mat, and a worn drawing pinned to the wall. It was a sketch of the village, but beautifully detailed. Her eyes lingered on it, and for a moment she felt something shift. Maybe there was more to him than they told her. But fear still clung tightly to her chest. That night, Emily lay stiffly on one side of the hut, facing the wall. Jacob remained on the other, barely making a sound. The silence was louder than the laughter they had left behind. The wind rustled through the holes in the roof, and a faint drip echoed from a leaky spot near the corner. She couldn't sleep. Her mind spun with shame, confusion, and fear. Yet not once did he approach her. No threats, no crazed behavior, just the occasional cough and the creak of his weight shifting on the mat. In the morning, she found a steaming cup of boiled herbs and a plate of roasted yam waiting for her on the bench. Jacob wasn't in the hut. She blinked in confusion. He had gone to the stream, and when he returned, he placed a bundle of firewood beside the door without a word. Emily watched him from inside, her curiosity growing. Was this the madman the village spoke of? He hadn't spoken to her, but his quiet actions spoke volumes. For the first time, she realized the village might have been wrong, or at least, they didn't know the full story. Over the next few days, Jacob remained silent but consistent. He woke up early, brought water from the stream, and left small meals for Emily without speaking. He never raised his voice, never came too close, he simply worked. Emily began to notice things, like how his movements were precise, how he watched the stars before sleeping, and how he carved small wooden figures by moonlight. One evening, curiosity took over. She walked over to where he sat carving and watched from behind. His fingers moved with care, shaping a small horse from a block of wood. He turned slowly and handed her the horse without a word. Their eyes met for the first time, and something passed between them. A fragile thread of understanding. Emily took the horse, unsure how to react. It was the first kind gesture anyone had offered her in weeks. Her heart softened slightly, even as her mind stayed guarded. That night she placed the little horse beside her mat before lying down. It was a tiny thing, but it felt like a beginning. Word began to spread through the village. Women at the stream whispered that Emily had not yet run away. Some speculated that she had gone mad too. Others said she was cursed. A few said she must be planning her escape. Emily ignored them. She now walked to the stream with her head held just slightly higher, not because she was proud, but because she was beginning to see differently. Jacob never spoke, but his silence had weight. His presence had rhythm. One day, while collecting water, a group of women snickered and asked if her madman had finally scared her mute. Emily just smiled faintly and walked away. When she returned home, she found Jacob trying to split thick firewood with a worn machete. She offered to help. He paused, looked at her, and then quietly nodded. For the first time, they worked side by side. He handed her smaller pieces, and she placed them neatly into a stack. It was quiet but not uncomfortable. That evening, when she handed him a cup of water instead of waiting for him to fetch it himself, he looked at her for a long moment before giving a single, soft nod. It felt like progress. Days passed, and Emily began cleaning the hut out of habit. She swept the dusty floor, folded Jacob's mat, and arranged the books in the corner. One afternoon, while rearranging an uneven wooden plank near the center of the floor, she noticed something odd. It moved. Curiosity sparked. She pulled it up, and underneath, hidden carefully, was a worn leather journal. The pages were filled with tiny, neat handwriting. Her breath caught as she flipped through the first few pages. These weren't the ramblings of a madman. These were reflections, observations, brilliant thoughts. She sat down and read until her legs went numb. The journal described the stars, village politics, philosophy, and even inventions he wished he could build. Jacob had once been educated, possibly even wealthy, but there was pain between the lines, betrayal. Something had happened to him. Emily held the journal tightly, as if holding a new truth. That night, when he returned from the forest carrying a small rabbit, she didn't look away. She asked, softly, if he had written it. He froze. His face changed. Then slowly, barely above a whisper, he said yes. After that night, Jacob began to speak. Not much, but enough. His voice was soft, a little raspy from disuse, but there was a sharp clarity in every word. He told her how he had once studied engineering in the city, how he had plans for irrigation systems and tools that could help farmers. But after his father's death, a bitter fight over land left him betrayed by his own family. He came to the village to heal, but the grief, isolation, and betrayal shattered him, and the villagers mistook his silence for madness. Emily felt her chest tighten with emotion. She had judged him too. Now, each time she looked at him, she saw not a madman, but a broken genius trying to find peace. She began to tell him her story too, how her father died young, how her stepmother married into the family and turned her into a servant, how marriage to Jacob was supposed to be punishment, but she was starting to see it might have been her rescue. That night, she didn't sleep right away. She lay awake, staring at the little wooden horse beside her mat and thinking, maybe this was fate in disguise. Trouble came early one morning when Emily went to the market alone. As she selected cassava roots, a drunken man staggered toward her, mocking her for being the madman's wife. He grabbed her wrist and sneered. Emily tried to pull away, but the man laughed louder, drawing a small crowd. Suddenly, Jacob appeared, silent, fast, and deadly serious. Before anyone realized, he had yanked the man away and shoved him so hard he tumbled into a basket of peppers. Jacob didn't speak a word. He just stared, eyes blazing, until the man scrambled away like a beaten dog. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Nobody had expected Jacob to defend her, let alone with such quiet rage. Emily's heart raced, not from fear, but something deeper. Gratitude. Safety. She looked up at him, his chest rising and falling, fists clenched. He took her hand, not forcefully, not awkwardly, but with purpose, and led her away from the crowd. As they walked home, her fingers remained wrapped in his, and for the first time, she didn't want to let go. That evening, Emily cooked yam porridge with roasted peppers, the scent filling the hut with warmth. Jacob sat nearby, sharpening a knife on a smooth stone, occasionally glancing her way. When she placed a bowl in front of him and sat with her own, there was a strange comfort between them, like two old souls learning to speak without words. As she took her first bite, she caught him staring. Their eyes met, and for the first time since she had arrived, he smiled. It was small, almost invisible, but it was real, and it melted something inside her. Emily smiled back, wide, honest, and full of surprise. She hadn't smiled like that in months. They ate in silence, but it no longer felt empty. Every glance, every shared breath in that tiny room felt like its own language. When the meal was done, she washed their bowls and returned inside to find Jacob laying out the mat for her. Not just his, but hers too. He had folded hers neatly, placed a fresh wrapper on top. It wasn't much, but to Emily it felt like a gift, the kind that meant everything. Emily watched as the wind tugged gently at the edge of the thatched roof, scattering dry leaves across the hut's entrance. She had grown used to the quiet, but today it felt heavy, like something unsaid was pressing between them. Jacob was outside, fixing a broken section of fencing with careful hands. She sat on the stool by the doorway, the wooden horse in her lap. Her thumb traced its curves, the details etched by his once silent hands. How could the entire village miss what she now saw so clearly? He wasn't mad. He was wounded. Wounded people didn't shout. They hid. When he came in for water, she finally asked the question that had been aching in her chest for days. Why didn't you ever defend yourself? Why did you let them believe you were mad? He paused mid-sip, lowered the cup and sat on the ground beside her. His reply came slow but sharp. Because sometimes silence is safer than truth. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She had lived her own life shrinking into corners, walking on eggshells to keep peace with her stepmother. Now she saw him not just as a man wronged, but a mirror of her own pain. The villagers thought Jacob's silence was madness, but they never noticed his discipline. Every morning before sunrise, he walked to the stream, not only to fetch water, but to think, to breathe. Emily followed him once, barefoot through the dewy grass. She stayed hidden behind a tree, watching as he sat by the water's edge, sketching in a notebook with a charcoal stub. His face looked younger in the early light, less burdened. She could almost see the man he used to be, before they broke him. That's when she realized his silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint. Later that day, she placed a clean cloth over the table and served him without being asked. He looked up, surprised, and Emily finally said it. "You're not broken. You're just trying to survive." His hands froze mid-meal. Then he whispered, almost afraid, "You see me." For a moment they sat in stillness, the weight of that sentence hovering between them. She reached across the table and gently touched his wrist. "Yes, I see you." And for the first time, Jacob's eyes welled with tears, not from pain, but from being seen. The knock came just after midday, sharp, impatient, and unexpected. Emily and Jacob exchanged a glance. No one ever visited. Jacob opened the door cautiously. Standing there was Margaret, Emily's stepmother, arms folded, her lips curled into a smirk. She had come not out of concern, but out of curiosity. Word had spread that Emily hadn't run away, hadn't lost her mind. Rumours that the madman was still sane were bubbling under the village roofs, and Margaret came to see for herself. The sight of Jacob, quiet, clean, composed, visibly unsettled her. Margaret stepped inside without invitation, her eyes scanning the hut with disgust. "You've made yourself at home with a madman," she said. Emily didn't flinch. For the first time in her life, She didn't shrink under her stepmother's words. Instead, she stood beside Jacob, her voice steady. "I'd rather be here with a kind man than rot in your house with cruelty." The words hit harder than a slap. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but Jacob gently closed the door before she could answer, and just like that, Emily had taken her power back. That evening, Jacob brought home a bag of corn seeds, something Emily hadn't seen in the hut before. He told her he wanted to start a small garden behind the house, a patch of green in the dust. Emily offered to help. The next morning, they cleared the dry grass and soft earth behind the hut, side by side. She worked barefoot, laughter bubbling up as she stumbled on a hidden root and fell into Jacob's arms. He caught her gently, and for a heartbeat too long they stayed there, his hands on her waist, her eyes locked on his. She smiled. He didn't let go immediately. Later, as they planted the seeds in neat rows, Jacob taught her how deep to place each one, how to cover it without crushing it. Their fingers brushed often, and neither pulled away. There was something sacred in that soil, something deeper than corn. It was trust, connection, a slow blooming of hearts long buried beneath shame. As the wind stirred the newly turned earth, Emily whispered a quiet thank you, to him, to herself, and maybe even to fate. 2 weeks later, a small boy appeared at their door, clutching a bleating goat with a bleeding leg. His name was Daniel, the potter's son. The villagers had told him Jacob once stitched a chicken's broken wing, so maybe, just maybe, he could help the goat too. Emily opened the door, expecting Jacob to turn the boy away. Instead, he took the animal without a word, laid it on a straw mat, and began working. Emily watched in silence as he cleaned the wound with boiled herbs and carefully wrapped it in a cloth. His hands moved like he'd done it 100 times. The next day, Daniel returned, with his mother, 2 neighbours, and another sick goat. Word had spread. One by one, people began arriving, not to laugh, not to insult, but to ask for help. They came cautiously, unsure if Jacob would answer, and he did, not with smiles, not with speeches, but with skill. He treated wounds, fixed broken baskets, repaired an old woman's sandals. Slowly, quietly, the man they had ridiculed became the one they depended on. And, standing at his side, Emily felt a strange pride bloom in her chest. This was her husband. The skies broke open without warning. Rain slammed down in sheets, lightning splitting the horizon as thunder rolled over the village. Emily rushed to gather their drying clothes from the line, while Jacob secured the firewood under the overhang. Inside the hut, water seeped through the roof, pooling in corners. But instead of frustration, Jacob calmly moved pots beneath the drips and handed Emily a dry cloth. They worked side by side in the chaos, neither raising their voice, neither panicking. It was the first storm they weathered together, and something about it felt symbolic. As night fell, the storm worsened, howling like a wild beast outside. Jacob lit their clay lantern, and they sat together on the mat with a shared blanket. Water still dripped from the ceiling, but it no longer felt cold. Jacob spoke softly about his past, his mother who taught him how to heal animals, his dream to build a clinic in the village one day. Emily leaned into him, listening not just with her ears, but with her soul. The Madman label didn't belong here anymore. In this little hut of flickering light and leaking roofs, Jacob had never felt more human. It was just after sunrise when Chief Donovan's guards appeared at their hut. The villagers had been whispering about Jacob's healing, his tools, his quiet intelligence. The chief, an aging man who had ruled the village for over 3 decades, wanted to meet the so-called madman who now treated his people. Emily stepped outside, heart pounding, as Jacob stood behind her, calm as ever. The chief himself descended from the carriage, leaning on a carved staff, his sharp eyes scanning Jacob head to toe. There was no laughter this time, only curiosity. Chief Donovan entered the hut and sat on the wooden stool without invitation. He asked Jacob about his work, how he knew how to heal, where he'd learned his skills. Jacob answered plainly, explaining his background in city engineering, his fall from grace, and what he'd built in silence. The chief listened, not interrupting once. When it was over, he stood, walked outside and addressed the crowd that had gathered. "This man," he said, "is not mad, he is wise, and this woman is not cursed, she is blessed." And just like that, everything shifted. Change came like ripples in a pond. Days after the chief's declaration, the same villagers who once mocked Jacob began to bring him tools, food, and even scraps of metal and wood. He started building again, slowly, methodically. Emily helped sort wires and wash tools, amazed at the designs he sketched on old palm leaves. He wasn't just fixing things now, he was inventing. With Emily beside him, he repaired a broken water pulley, then designed a new cooking stove using discarded metal sheets. Children gathered daily to watch him work. No longer was he the village ghost, he was the mind behind its revival. Emily saw it all like a dream unfolding. Just weeks ago she had been forced into this marriage as punishment. Now she stood next to a man whose hands were reshaping an entire community. In the evenings, they walked through the village side by side. No one laughed anymore. Some greeted her with lowered heads, others offered her food or flowers in apology. She accepted it all with quiet grace, not because she forgot, but because she had risen, and everyone saw it now. At the back of a wooden chest beneath folded wrappers and old pots, Emily found a dress she'd never seen before. It was sky blue, simple but elegant, with fine stitching along the collar, clearly made with love. She held it up and turned to Jacob with a curious smile. "Whose was this?" He looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "I made that. For my bride. A long time ago." Emily froze, heart thudding. He had once believed he would have a normal life, a joyful union, and he'd held on to that dream, even in exile. That evening, without saying a word, she wore the dress. When Jacob saw her, he froze. For a man who rarely spoke, his silence now said more than any words could. He reached out, slowly, and took her hand. They didn't dance. There was no music, but they stood there in the centre of their tiny hut, forehead to forehead, their hearts finally beating in sync. In that quiet embrace, Emily felt like a bride, not the one they mocked, but the one fate had always meant her to be. Jacob rarely gave gifts, but one morning Emily found something new beside her mat. A carved wooden plaque, smooth and polished, with her name etched into it in perfect lettering. Emily. Nothing more, no titles, no embellishments, just her name. She traced it with her fingers and felt tears sting her eyes. No one had ever celebrated her existence so simply, so purely. In a world that once reduced her to burden, wife, or joke, here was proof that she mattered, not because of what she did, but because of who she was. She ran outside to find Jacob, who was cleaning his tools by the garden. She held the plaque up like a trophy. "You made this?" He nodded. "I see you," he said quietly, "and I want the world to know who you are." She couldn't help it. She hugged him, tightly, fiercely. No one had ever held her with such quiet reverence before. In that embrace, surrounded by tomato vines and red soil, Emily understood something that left her breathless. This wasn't survival anymore. This was love. The village held a gathering that week, a forum where villagers could raise concerns and offer ideas for improving community life. Normally, Jacob would have stayed back, but this time Emily convinced him to go. She stood beside him, her presence calm and unshakable. When it was their turn to speak, Jacob hesitated, lips parted, words stuck. The crowd waited. Some of the old skeptics leaned forward, smirking. Then Emily stepped up. Her voice rang clear as she spoke of the new stove Jacob built, the fixed water pulley, the goats he healed. Every sentence peeled away another layer of the lies they once believed. By the time she finished, silence filled the air. And then, applause. Real applause. Not polite, not hesitant, genuine. A few elders even stood. The chief nodded from his seat, a small smile on his weathered face. Jacob looked at Emily as if seeing her for the first time all over again. She hadn't just stood for him. She had lifted him, given him a voice. That night, when they returned to their hut, he didn't need to say anything. He simply held her hands, kissed her forehead, and exhaled for the first time in years. A dusty pickup truck rolled into the village one hot afternoon, raising eyebrows and kicking up trails of red earth. From it stepped a tall, clean-shaven man in a pressed shirt and sunglasses. Clearly not from around here. He asked for Jacob by name. Word spread quickly, and soon a crowd formed as the stranger made his way to Jacob's hut. Emily stood at the doorway as the man introduced himself as Michael, Jacob's cousin from the city. He looked stunned to see Jacob alive and well. His eyes lingered on Emily, then on the hut, then back to Jacob, unable to hide his disbelief. Inside the hut, Michael admitted he had heard rumours that Jacob had lost his mind. He confessed with shame that the family had let him go, believing it better that way. But seeing Jacob now, calm, respected, married, left him speechless. He apologised, not just to Jacob but to Emily. She accepted it with a nod, but the wound lingered. Jacob said little, but his eyes held fire. That evening, as the truck rolled away, Emily placed her hand over his. "You don't owe them anything," she said softly, and for the first time Jacob replied, "I know." A week after Michael's visit, a letter arrived, neatly folded and carried by a young boy on a bicycle. It was stamped and sealed, a rare sight in the village. Jacob opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the contents. His cousin had returned to the city and spoken to a university professor who once admired Jacob's work. The letter offered him a place on a new agricultural engineering project, something that could benefit not just the village, but the entire region. Jacob stood frozen, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Emily reached for it, reading over his shoulder. Her eyes widened with pride. Later that night, they sat by the garden, silent under the moonlight. He hadn't said whether he would go. She didn't pressure him. Instead, she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "You don't have to leave to matter, but if you do, I'll still be here. Always." Jacob turned to her, his voice low and firm. "I won't leave you behind. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The wind stirred the corn plants gently, as if nodding in agreement with the vow they had just made. The next morning, Jacob woke before the sun and walked to the edge of the village, where the land met the woods. He stood there for a long time, watching the fog drift across the fields he had once avoided. The village no longer feared him. They respected him. But this offer, this return to the world that once broke him, stirred old wounds. When he returned home, Emily was already up, sweeping the front of the hut. He handed her the letter and simply said, "Let's go." Her eyes searched his, and she knew he wasn't running back to the past. He was building a future. As word spread, the villagers gathered again, but this time not with laughter or mockery. They brought gifts: dried fish, yams, woven mats, small tokens of thanks. Even Margaret arrived, quieter than usual, offering Emily a faded family ring. Emily took it, not out of sentiment, but as a symbol of who she had become, someone worthy of honour, even from her enemies. The path to the city would be long, uncertain, but with Jacob's hand in hers and the village behind them, she no longer feared the unknown. The cart creaked along the dirt path as Jacob and Emily left the village behind. They sat close, her hand wrapped tightly in his, the sun rising before them like a promise. Behind them, the villagers waved, some smiling, some teary-eyed. The same people who once laughed now stood in silence, honouring the journey that began in shame but ended in dignity. Emily looked over her shoulder one last time and saw the hut growing smaller in the distance, but in her heart, it had never been about the hut. It was about the man beside her and the love they built from ruins. They reached the city weeks later, but the real journey had begun long before. In lecture halls and design labs, Jacob brought village wisdom into modern ideas. Emily started a small outreach group, teaching girls that they were not born to be pitied or punished. At night, they returned to a quiet apartment where wooden carvings lined the windowsill, each one made by Jacob's hands. The last one he made was of her, and beneath it, carved simply into the wood, were the words, "She saved me." Moral lesson: Never judge a person by the whispers of others or the scars they carry in silence. True strength is often hidden in humility, and real love is born not from perfection, but from patience, understanding, and courage. What others mock today may become the very thing they admire tomorrow. Sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in what first appears to be shame. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more interesting stories every day. Thank you.